Hey there, everybody. This is Eli with Premiere on Script. Welcome to video 4 of our series where we're building remote controllers for Adobe applications using WebSockets. If you watched the previous 2 videos, we're currently at a stage where we have a server up and running. We have a web page that connects to that server and listens to and emits certain events based on kind of this design we have over here. And so in this movie, we are going to go about building our Premiere panel out. So let's get started on doing that. Now earlier we have all these remote app folders, but we originally created a remote PPRO folder. Currently we are I'm inside the directory here, so I'm going to back out to the root. And now that we're in the root, I want to clone down some template Premiere panel because I don't want to write everything from scratch. So I'm going to go out and I just recently posted this simple CEP template on my GitHub. I'll have the link in the description below. We're going to clone this down. So copy that. We'll go git clone and bring that guy down. We're going to delete this original remote PPRO folder we built. And I'm going to then rename this one remote PPRO. I also want to go, I might have to go out to the file system and do this. Go to our desktop, remote Adobe. We'll rename this. Oh, you can't because it's open. 1 second. That work now? I also want to go into this and we'll just delete the README and the get file in there. We don't need those. And I'll reopen VS Code. All right, so now we have this template panel in here. First step, we'll go in and change the manifest file. We'll call this PPRO WebSocket panel. And we'll just call, this will just be the same for all of our extension bundle name. We'll name this our extension ID name as well. Extension ID down here. And then we'll title this Adobe Remote. That works there. That looks good. We'll keep this ID copied. We'll come over to our debug. We'll add it in here as well. And then into our index.html, we will give this a name, Adobe Remote. What else do we need to change from this template? Let me think. Everything looks good in here. We've got that, that's fine. Okay, so I think we're ready. Just had to go change a couple of those names in the manifest and the debug file and the index.html. So I think we've got this all kind of customized for what we need now, and we can get into actually building what we want. I guess the next step I want to take is we want to load this up in Premiere, but we don't want to have to close down Premiere every single time we send an update out to this panel or we save out an update. So one way we can achieve getting around this is by creating a symlink into our extensions folder. So here's my extensions folder. I'm on Windows, obviously, here. So I'm going to go down to Command Prompt, but I want to open this up as administrator. You can create this on Mac too. I'll explain how to do that in just a second, but we want to create a symlink into our extensions folder. So to do that, we are going to write make link /D, and then I'm going to copy this path here and give my panel a name there. So we'll call this Adobe Remote. And now I have to give it a link to what I want the source of this symbolic link to be. So that's out on the desktop, Remote Adobe Remote PPRO. We can copy this in. And we have symbolic link created for this in our extensions folder. So if we come out, we can see Adobe Remote. and this is everything that we have there. So that's a really nice hack to getting around having to reload over and over Premiere. You can do this on Mac as well. You would just type in ln-s, and then you would give it the like path to your like source extension, and then next you would give it just the path to your extensions folder. So in this, you don't like up here, I was able to name my symbolic link directory, Adobe Remote. In the Mac, you would just inherit the name of whatever folder you're giving it a path to. So path to your source extension and the path to your folder. So that's how you would do it on a Mac. Okay, now that we have that there, let's load Premiere and see if our panel is at least present. And we can come up and check that in the window. And there we go. We have Adobe Remote. And if you remember in the demo, there's nothing in this HTML. I think I have just like there's just a body here. We'll just add like an H2, give it an ID of temp text. And say testing. Now you can see this is where the symbolic link comes into play. I can just close this and reload it. And now we have testing. So this is where our text will go as we're listening to those events later on. Okay, so our panel is up and running. It loads in Premiere. So let's close out all these other files up here. And all we're going to need are the HTML page, the main.js, and then our extend script file. Okay. So on our web page, we had to use the Socket.io client, and we included that in our index.html. But for this, we're going to have to go through the whole npm process again and install Socket.io with our Premiere panel. So let's go to terminal. We want to cd into remote PPRO, and then we'll do another npm init. We'll just say all this is good. And then once again, we'll go npm I socket.io. Cool. And before I forget, I want to also in both of these include a gitignore. Oh, looks like I already have a gitignore included in this template where I have node modules. So I'm going to copy this gitignore and put it over in our remote app as well, just so I don't forget for later. Okay, so we have Socket.io included with our panel now. So let's come back to our main.js and let's require that Socket.io client. So const.io. And then we'll also really quickly just grab the ID of this temp text down here. And then we can set up our socket. So we will go const socket is equal to IO. And this is where we indicate the URL that we're going to be connecting to our socket. So right now we will be connecting to localhost. And what was the host number that we had set up earlier? We are on 3333. Localhost 3333. And now we will go socket on connect, just like we did on the web page side. And we will log that we are connected. Okay, let's start by testing this out. If we have that all saved and we close out, we'll come down to our Adobe Remote Panel, and that's there. Then we'll come back out and we have to start up our server. So we'll go cool. And then when we launch this, we should get a connection over there. And we are not. Okay, I had to pause there really quick to figure out what was going on. The reason that was not working is because I didn't include HTTP :/ before the localhost stuff. So go and add that in. And then again, if we come down and we'll restart our server and then come in and test out our extension, we should see that we have a connection, and we do. We have a new socket ID connection right there. Okay, so now, right, we have the Premiere extension connected to our WebSockets. Now we have to do some of those listening for the events that we were emitting earlier. So let's go back to our design over here. And looks like we need to listen for a request sequences PPRO event. So let's do that. Socket.on request sequences PPRO. No data associated with this one. It's just a trigger, and we will do cs.eval script. And this will trigger our extend script call, which will do get seeks. We'll write this in just a few minutes, but it's just going to grab all the sequences from our project. And then from there, it'll return an array of those. And we will, let's first update the message. So message.innerText equals sending sequences. That'll update in the HTML. And then we will do socket.emit. The event we need is sequence list. And we'll attach the data onto that. And the data is just going to be the seeks that are returned from extend script. Cool. All right, so I think from there we have our first interaction with Premiere. The next one we are going to have to set up, we're listening for a render seek PPRO, and this is going to queue it up to Media Encoder. So let's write this one. We'll do socket.on render seek PPRO. And that is going to pass in a node ID. From here, let's also update the message to say that we're rendering a sequence. And then let's do the same thing we did before. We'll do cs.eval script, and we will do render seek, and we'll pass the node ID into that. Okay, so I think that's all we have to write from our panel JavaScript side. Now we also need to get into extend script, and we need to write all of the code to make this stuff actually work in Premiere. You can see that we're including this file JSON2.js. This is a way to include JSON stringify and JSON parse in your extend script because extend script code is so old. So we're going to include that. That's included in the template panel that I cloned down from GitHub. And now we have a couple of functions that we need to write. The first one was get seeks, which was called on that very first request to gather all the sequence names. So we'll create an empty array right here, and then we're just going to loop through all the arrays and just gather their names. Pretty easy. We'll also gather the node IDs of all of them. So we'll write for var a equals 0, a is less than app.project.sequences.num sequences. A++. Then what we're going to do is we'll do array.push, and we'll push an object into here. It will be name will be app.project.sequences a.name. And then the node ID down here will be app.project.sequences a.project item.node ID. And then from here we can return this array, but we will JSON stringify it first. Okay, so that's all we need for that first setup. So now in our design, we should be able to request it, and it should be able to send it back over to our web page. We can give this a shot really quick. We'll restart our server. We'll restart our panel. And then we'll go over to localhost 3333. And when we hit retrieve sequences, nothing is happening. So let's check out what's going on here. Okay, so I was able to figure out what was going on with that. Apparently, the panel's not liking our include statement up here to include the JSON2.js down here. So easiest way to solve this quickly in this tutorial, I'm just going to remove that and just copy and paste all of JSON2.js just into the bottom down here. And then everything should work just fine. So let's go back and test this out again. npm start. Our sockets will be connected. Reload this. And then when we come back over here, when we run retrieve sequences, we're going to get a list of all the sequences that are in our Premiere project. Okay, so that part is working right. Now we have to set up the render. So we're going to come back to our extend script file. And down here, we will run a function render seek. And we're going to be passing in the node ID to that on the JavaScript side. So pass that in. And what we'll do is we'll loop through all of the sequences in the project to try and find a match for that node ID. So we will copy this from up here, just looping through all of the sequences in the project. And then we'll go if app.project.sequences a project item node ID. If this is a match with the node ID that we passed in, then we know that that's the correct sequence to render. So we will render it. We'll do render and pass in that sequence. And then we'll write one other function down here that we'll call render. And in this one, I'm just hard coding in our export preset. So we'll talk about that later, but there's multiple things in this project that we can do to make it better. For this, I'm just trying to get the example across. So we're going to hard code in our example render preset. I'll start by saying app.encoder.launch encoder. Then we will do app.encoder.encode sequence. And in here, we pass in a couple things. First, we will pass in the sequence, which we need to include here. And then we need to include where this is going to be going, the export location. So we'll hard code this as well into users, Eli, desktop. And then we will add in the seek.name. And then we'll also give it the extension of MP4. So it's got its export location. Now it needs its EPR file, the export preset. which I have saved to the desktop as well. So it'll be easy to just type in simple export preset.epr. You can see that. I'm including that over here, simple export preset.epr. Set one more comma. We'll do app.encoder. Encode work area. And then true. And that last one, I believe it means to remove it from the export queue when the export is completed. Cool. Okay, and then our final step is going to be to do app.encoder.startBatch to automatically start this in Media Encoder. And that should be everything we need. So let's give it a test and see if this runs. We'll come in here. We will restart our server. We will reload our panel. And then we'll go over to this. We'll retrieve sequences. We get a list of sequences. We'll choose, say, video 2, and we'll hit render sequence. And now this should launch Media Encoder. And all right, so I had to take a quick break there to figure out what was going on. And it looks like in our main.js file, in our Premiere panel, I missed something. We're passing over a node ID string here over to ExtendScript, but we have to indicate that to ExtendScript. So we need to add in quotation marks around our node ID. That way it knows that this is a string coming in. And so this should now work for us. If I come back out and run npm start, and we will reload the extension, come out here, retrieve the sequences, and render. And there we go. We now have our remote access to rendering sequences in Premiere. So that's been like the whole goal of this whole project, this whole series, right, is to get this to work. But it doesn't really mean anything if you're still working on the local host, like on your local system. So in the next movie, we will wrap things up by talking about getting this application out to Heroku, where you can host it and access it through the web.